We have a number of people who are joining us online virtually for this. Hopefully we'll be able to bring them up on the screen. We are looking forward to having this conversation. We have three individuals who are going to be live with cystic fibrosis who are joining us online, and we have one parent who is going to be joining us here live. Sandy Soufian, who will be joining, and are we going to be able to see these individuals on the screen? I do believe that is the intent. So while we're looking for them to come up, Sandy Soufian, who is joining us, lives with cystic fibrosis and co-leads the PCORI-funded Cystic Fibrosis Reproductive and Sexual Health Collaborative. I'm not going to try and read that acronym. She is also an associate professor with multiple degrees in disability studies at the University of Illinois at Chicago and a member of the PCORI Patient Engagement Advisory Panel and a PCORI ambassador. Ronnie Sharp, and I thought I saw them momentarily ago, has started a blog called Run Sick Boy Run about his life with cystic fibrosis, not to be confused with the Sick Boy podcast that we were speaking with Jeremy yesterday. He has also launched Cystic Fibrosis Life, or cysticlife.org, a social network for the cystic fibrosis community, and recently co-founded the Savvy Cooperative, a co-op connecting industry with patients. Michael Hamilton is a Cystic Fibrosis Canada doctoral student in British Columbia. He studies the binding site of ivacaftor on CFTR, so rather molecular, if you will. He is a patient advocate on the Cystic Fibrosis Canada, our CF CANACT steering committee, that is our clinical trial network, and part of the organizing committee for Gear Up for CF in Vancouver. Finally, Lena Bardwaj is a mother of two teenage girls who juggles a successful career and life as a wife and mom. Lena has become more involved with cystic fibrosis after her daughter was diagnosed at 2 months. Rena, who is now 13, and Lena have participated in over 13 clinical trials thus far and will be sharing their experience with us as well. Lena, are you in the room? There you are. Are you going to come up and join me, please? We'll share a microphone if that's okay. So, Ronnie, are you there?
Yes, I am.
So, Ronnie, I'm going to start with you because, interestingly enough, you came up twice yesterday, both in conversation with PCORI, where cysticlife.org was described or mentioned as a recipient or a participant in PCORI. And also, it came up not directly necessarily, but in terms of what we just heard momentarily about the ethics, about compensation for individuals or for people living with a disease who are participating in research. And, you know, does the payment of sort of like the professionals, does that sort of place a value judgment on their contributions as opposed to the value of what the patients are contributing? So I was wondering if you would want to talk to us just a little bit about the experience of creating really a really patient-driven research project with Cystic Life, and then what, you know, some of your thoughts and some of the successes, I guess, or maybe the uptake of Savvy Co-op in terms of what you're doing now, really connecting patients with industry.
Sure, yes, and thank you certainly for the opportunity to join you guys today. So, you know, at Cystic Life being a social network, we of course always saw conversations about what was working for individuals. And you'd see one-off conversations that became kind of a ripple effect of, oh yeah, I've tried that, it works for me. Yeah, I've tried that, it doesn't work for me. But it always started with the patient experience, which in a patient's view it seems so rare that research starts with the patient experience. And so we began thinking about how can we capture that and actually turn it into research. And that's where, you know, establishing a patient-driven community for cystic fibrosis that was supported by PCORI was born. And our process was fairly simple. We surveyed the community and we said, hey, any idea you have that you would like to see researched, send it our way. And of course, we had hundreds and hundreds of people submit different ideas. And then we put together an advisory board that was multi-stakeholder, all across the spectrum, different demographic, different life experience. And we use a scoring rubric to kind of rank where all these ideas would fit in terms of their feasibility, their cost, their impact, their uniqueness. And we ended up with a top 5. With that top 5 then being patient-driven or community-driven, we turned it back over to the community and said, okay, here's the top 5 that this multi-stakeholder panel believes we can really drive forward. Which do you want us to see really get behind? And they voted. There's a clear winner. And that winner was, can exercise be used as medicine in cystic fibrosis? Meaning, can we prescribe a certain amount of exercise at a certain intensity for a certain time to have the most clinical impact for cystic fibrosis? And that was the clear winner. There were others that finished higher than the bottom, but the clear winner was that. And so that was very interesting to me as a patient advocate, that the research, and it was true for the second and third place, but the research was centered around stuff that was regular life that we all did in our normal walk of life that may be completely apart from CF care. We don't exercise, we don't eat certain food maybe because we have CF, quote unquote, but we're always wondering, is this having an impact? And so that was kind of, that was that project. To answer your question as far as patients getting paid and patients being valued, that was one of the driving forces behind starting a patient co-op. And one of our tenets is, we don't work with clients. We don't work with hospital systems, product designers, product developers, unless they're willing to pay patients. And the reason behind that, again, is personal experience. So being in this world and being visible, I, of course, was asked constantly to be the patient voice for the cystic fibrosis community, which the more I did it, the more uncomfortable I felt. Because, I know my experience living in Gilbert, Arizona, having a supportive family, how I was raised, what I believe, makes me a very unique perspective compared to all the other unique perspectives. And I don't value my perspective any more than I value the single mother living in Brooklyn, New York with cystic fibrosis that has a completely different experience than mine. And so that felt very uncomfortable. But I also knew that not paying patients for their unique perspective becomes a diversity issue. I have the ability to take off of work for a day and go consult, go sit on a panel. That single mother in Brooklyn, she doesn't have that ability. She may get fired if she tries to take off a day at work. And so it becomes a diversity issue when you're not willing to pay patients, because you can only get patients that can afford to give their opinion. And so with Savvy Cooperative, we look at it as we're all experts. We may not have had 14 years of schooling. We may have not read the same books, but we've lived that life, and we know this life intimately. And in many regards, when it comes to developing products, when it comes to designing systems, that experience, in my humble opinion, is much more valuable, because healthcare is one of the few industries, and it still boggles my mind, but in almost every other industry, before you start a product or start building a product, the first thing you do is what? You talk to your customers. But see, the problem we have in healthcare is healthcare views their customers as doctors, as insurance companies, as health systems. So they go talk to them. Well, newsflash, them are not patients. They don't have our experience. They don't know what patients need. And you could talk to them till you're blue in the face, and you'll never get to the bottom of what we feel. And ultimately, if you develop products that capture and address those feelings, those products will be successful. And so that's what we do at Savvy Cooperative, is we bring together the experts that include patients, and we value that expertise, and we treat them as equitable partners. And we never say, hey, doctor, you charge $250 an hour, and that's what your opinion's worth, but patient, here's $25. That's what your opinion's worth. And so that's where we are.
Thank you, Ronnie. I greatly appreciate that. And I think it's timely. When we were talking about the ethics, and we're spending actually a day and a half here talking about patient participation. I love the notion of an organization that helps partner patients with industry. Sandy, you come from a very different background, and you're working now with PCORI and on a collaborative project. I wonder if you'd share with us your learnings about engaging patients in research and really engaging patients in research.
So can everyone hear me? Because I'm on this headset.
Yep.
First of all, thank you for inviting me to speak, and thank you to Lisa for recommending me. So with a colleague of mine and a friend, we developed 3 years ago a collaborative called the Cystic Fibrosis Reproductive and Sexual Health Collaborative, CFRESH. And it is a patient-driven research-generating project on sexual reproductive health issues for women with CF. And the way that we've sort of set up an infrastructure for patient engagement. At the beginning, I remember my colleagues saying to me, oh my gosh, these patients, they don't want to, they just see themselves as subjects, and they're not taking the initiative, and they're so passive. And I'm like, well, this is the tradition in CF research, that patients have just been subjects. And I will say that 3 years later, we have the opposite, right? We have very engaged patients. We have now 100 patient partners. And people are, very vocal about their needs, about being equitable partners, about payment, sort of all the things that Ronnie brought up. But what we've done is set up this infrastructure whereby for the past 3 years, every single month, we have a 2-hour meeting with women who want to come, right? So we advertise on a specific focus theme. So dating, motherhood, hormones, incontinence, those kinds of things. And we have breakout sessions with facilitation questions whereby we talk about different issues of that focus theme in order to get at central research questions that we want researchers to pursue. And at the end of the 2 hours, we take a poll and vote on the top 3. And those top 3 are then given to what's called our research advisory panel, which is a panel of patients and researchers and clinicians. And we talk about how to translate those questions into viable studies. And then people from that, we now have work groups according to theme in our research advisory panel. So I'm the head of the hormone work group, for example, and we just submitted an LOI, a letter of intent, to do a hormone tracking project. So we also pursue grant funding with patients on the team. And so patients help us, and I'm a patient. I'm a patient and a researcher, so I'm in this very odd state, which has been very interesting. And speaking to just Ronnie's point in terms of compensation, for me, it's part of my work now and my research agenda. And so I need a protected time, just like a clinician would need protected time. And that's been a battle because I have really just been seen as a patient. And so, sort of negotiating that has been really an interesting thing, and I'm still negotiating it. But, that's an aside. In any case, I've seen sort of the development of this deepening of patient engagement. And next year, I'm a PI for a CF foundation in the U.S., what's called an Impact Award, where we're continuing these monthly focus groups. And next year, we're going to be writing a sexual reproductive health education guide for providers. So like, what do we want providers to be asking us in the clinic? A lot of people say they really wish their provider said, do you need to go to the bathroom before you take a PFT, right? Because they have incontinence and they're too embarrassed to say it. So they want those kinds of questions to be integrated into the provision of care. So we're going to be writing an education guide, and the project team isn't going to be writing it, it's the women. So we will have teams of women writing these chapters on different focus themes. Does that get to your point?
It does. I mean, one of the things I was going to ask you as a follow-up question was some of the impact of engaging patients in terms of changing the way or impacting the way you communicate that information, what we call here knowledge translation, because a lot of the research gets published and it gets published in peer-reviewed journals. And
Right.
I wanted to know if there was a difference, if you're actually speaking with the community and the patients, how the results of the research get communicated. And I think you've just answered that by, saying yes, updating questionnaires or incorporating the results of that knowledge through questionnaires. I wonder, do you have other examples where you would look, that come to mind where the methodology of knowledge translation is impacted by patient engagement as well?
That's a great question. In terms of dissemination of research findings, one of our tasks is to take research and translate it into sort of non-expert language, right? And the studies that we hope to be doing, part of that, we have a commitment to take that research and disseminate it to our patient partners. We also have a PCORI Patient Engagement Eugene Washington Award, whereby the team is creating PCOR training for the cystic fibrosis community, both patients and caregivers and clinicians, to sort of integrate PCOR principles, because the research community is actually quite resistant to doing PCOR. And so we're trying to sort of push it into the agenda of the research community. So yes, we do have an avenue to disseminate, but also translate. And I know for my project, I spend some time sort of teaching my team what research is about, how you go about getting a grant, what is involved in that, the different designs of research, what is a research question? What evidence do you need to answer a research question? So sort of basic research 101 kind of things, so that they understand what this is all about and what they're getting into when they join a research team. A lot of times the lingo is never explained. And so it's important to educate patient partners sort of on, what is an LOI? Why is that important? What is a specific AIMS page, right? All these things that are assumed by researchers, but really are not known and need to be made explicit. So, yeah.
I love your comment on translating, if you will, some of the scientific research into lay languages, something as fundamental as that. We have lay reviewers on our grant review panel, and every application comes with a scientific abstract and a lay abstract, and there are times when we have people who are lay reviewers but who have scientific backgrounds and nonetheless do not understand the lay summary, because it's difficult sometimes for people who speak in a certain language to change completely that language and to convert it into a lay language. Lena, thank you very much for being here in person.
No problem.
You've been and you and your daughter have been involved in a number of different clinical trials. And I do want to say, for those of you, when we had the reception, we had a couple of videos going, and we had them looping, and a number of people were able to go over and see. And you were one of the stars of one of those videos.
Thank you.
Were you not? I was wondering if you'd share with the audience the experience of participating in clinical trials and patient engagement from the patient perspective, if you will, in clinical trials. I don't believe at this stage you were necessarily involved in designing the clinical trials.
No.
No. But you were involved certainly in understanding them, and you have a 13-year-old daughter. Mm-hmm. How much did you feel that she was able to be engaged in terms of understanding and really participating in the research?
So our perspective is a little different, because I'm not a patient, but I am a parent and have been living with CF in our lives since she was 2 months old. So it's been a big part of our life. We started participating in clinical trials right from the get-go. She's done 13 so far, so essentially one for every year of her life. And in the beginning, she didn't understand what she was doing, because a lot of them were done as an infant. But as she's progressed, she's done so many now, and she's okay with it. She understands that she's gotten older, so she understands the importance of research. She's actually benefited directly from 2 of the studies she's participated in. She's continued to use, so one was the hypertonic saline, so she continues to use that every day. And so she was there for the clinical trial, she did it there, and it just progressed as part of her life. And then the second is the Orkambi, so she was part of the clinical trial for that, and then she's progressed into using it. So the Orkambi was the one that was most recent, and she understood it a lot better. As she's gotten older, I find that the talks are to her rather than just to me. She gets to sign her own consent, so they're making her more aware of what the purpose of the clinical trials are, how it's going to benefit her. And because she's been doing it, it's just a part of her. She doesn't mind doing it, but she understands now that she's older why it's important and why we need to participate to work together to find a cure or better treatments, better ways of doing things. So she's become more aware, and I think because we've been doing it since she was small, she's accepting of it, and she understands the importance of it, and she's more willing to participate in the future. When she was younger, I used to try and pick clinical trials that weren't invasive or that didn't take up too much time, because she's already missing so much school, things that wouldn't interrupt her life any more than CF already does. But as we've gotten older, it's more what will benefit the most, either her or someone else. So she also understands the importance of doing clinical trials, not just for herself, but something that will benefit others, because she's only directly benefited from 2 of the ones that she's done. The other ones she probably will never benefit from, but she still participated. So she understands that it's her responsibility to give back, but also to do it for herself, but to do it for others. So that's kind of our perspective.
I find the aspect of someone young participating in a clinical trial that doesn't benefit them intriguing. And I'm wondering if you would, if you noticed anything about, if there's any knowledge that we can get from her response to a clinical trial that didn't ultimately benefit her directly.
So a lot of the choices were made by me when she was younger, so she didn't really have much of a choice. But now that she's seen it and she understands that, we're going in and doing this clinical trial, we went over Christmas break. She had to wake up early and go downtown, and she did an MRI, and she didn't really understand why she was doing it. But she didn't complain about it. She didn't argue. She didn't say, no, I don't want to do it. She said, she did it, and she understood that it was something that was going to help someone else. But I think because she's been around it so long and she's been listening to us speak about it at home or with others, and she knows what life is like with CF. She's okay talking about CF. She's okay educating other people about CF. And she's okay with the idea of working together as a team to make a difference. And so I think because it's been part of her life since the beginning, and we were always willing to participate since she was small, I think that's just become part of her life, and she understands the importance of it. And I think that was important to do from the beginning, and not to treat CF as, it's a disease that she has, but it's not her. And I always try and encourage her to be herself and not to let CF limit her abilities, but understand that it is a part of her, and the only way we are going to make a difference is if we all work together. She understands that the CF community is really small, and if we don't all do our part, we're never going to be able to make advancements.
Thank you. So yesterday, one of the things that we saw from Jennifer from Generation or from the UK, it was she put up a slide of an informed consent form, and it was a typical informed consent form. And I've seen these things, and my eyes kind of glaze over. And there are details in there, and she showed examples of some wonderful informed consent forms or patient information forms really designed for pediatric population, much more accessible. And I'm wondering, has anybody ever asked, those forms? I mean, your daughter looks at these forms. I glaze over when I read these things. How does an 11 or a 12-year-old respond to these?
So the forms are not very patient-friendly, especially for a 13-year-old. And I agree with that. So that would be something that I would love to see change. But from our experience, it isn't the forms that we're reading. It was really, I've never felt like we walked into a clinical trial and were shocked or surprised by anything that happened. And the reason being is it wasn't that we were given the forms to read over and take home and to deal with. It was that the team would come in and explain it to us really clearly. We knew what the time commitment was going to be. We knew exactly what was going to happen. We knew every step of the way what we were to expect. And it wasn't the forms. It was the way they explained everything to us. So yes, I agree the forms aren't so user-friendly, but it wasn't the forms that we were reading. It was really the information we were getting firsthand from the team. And it felt like everybody took the time to make sure we understood fully, and they wouldn't speak to Rihanna like she was an adult. They would speak to Rihanna like she was a child and she was going through it, and they would explain it to her like that. So that is a little different, but I agree that the forms could be.
So we heard this morning that some research ethics boards have difficulty with those modified information package. Would you have a message to send for such research ethics boards?
Well, I agree that it is important to listen to patients, and it is the patients are the ones that are going through it, and it's the patients, it's the caregivers, it's the families, it's everyone that goes through it, and if you don't listen to them and you just ignore them, we're not going to make the changes that we need to see. We're not going to see the improvements. We're not going to see the compliance by patients. So all the things that you're looking for, you won't see unless you get their perspective and try and tailor it to them.
Mike, are you online? Okay. We were hoping to have Mike Hamilton. It looks like we haven't connected with Mike. I'm not too sure what happened. He was certainly there this morning, so I don't know. And we have also, those of you who actually looked through the rest of the agenda will have noted that we were also had Tara Burke on the patient panel. Tara has been a long-time great partner of Cystic Fibrosis Canada and had volunteered, and as many of you have experienced in your own lives, life with cystic fibrosis got in the way. And unfortunately, she's not going to be joining us this morning, so what we will do. I would like, at this point in time, if our panel is okay, I'd like to turn it over to the audience. We have some individuals here who have some great experience in terms of patient engagement from very different angles, from very different approaches, and I'm wondering if we have some questions from the audience that the audience would like to put to our patient panel. Come on, folks, we've got a great opportunity here. All right. Ronnie, I'm going to come back to you. The experience, the research project that you had on the exercise, you had an interesting question about that. Is this something that could actually be prescribed? And I've heard that sort of in a different context as well, where we look at things that people do, and if they have a clinical benefit, can we somehow make it, I don't know, part of the system? So exercise would be one thing. Can you prescribe that, and what difference would that make? Another thing is that the dietary needs of people living with cystic fibrosis are quite significant. And there are tools that are developed, or things that are developed to improve that, some that are approved through clinical studies and others that are, I would say, maybe off the shelf, energy drinks and so on and so forth. Would you have any thoughts about incorporating those in some form of patient study? And is that something that came up in that list of topics that you and Cystic Life .org had looked for?
You nailed it. So exercise finished first. Second was supplement use, and again, doing studies, targeted studies around certain supplements that the community is already using, and what is the actual clinical benefit, and not placebo or the other. And then the third question that was voted in was around targeted or cyclical eating. And so the community was convinced that, eating certain foods was better for them, whether it's high fat or high protein. But a lot in the community were wondering, what if they ate at certain times? What if they ate certain amounts throughout the day, or one large meal here and a medium meal there? And so there was a timing question or before or after a workout. Essentially, could there be an eating program prescribed that would have the most clinical benefit in terms of what you eat when throughout the day? Because again, right, weightlifters do it, athletes do it. Well, why maybe patients could do it, and maybe it would have a clinical impact, a clinical benefit that we could feel. And so the patient community was very intrigued by that idea.
Mark.
Hi, John. Thanks very
Dr.
much.
Childers,
Thanks.
thank you for the question.
No, it is Mark, no doctor.
Mark. Yes, level playing field.
Exactly. So I really appreciate the panel and their insights into patient engagement. And we've been looking really very much at a patient-orientated research. But I'd like to perhaps change the focus a little bit in terms of quality improvement, which affects many CF clinics across North America. And
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Quality of?
quality improvement.
Quality improvement.
On there, because this is something which patient engagement, I think, is really important with. And we've had an experience where we've done patient journey mapping, which was quite a unique thing for the clinic to do, where families were invited to participate. And then they replied not to the clinic, but to the quality improvement office at the hospital. And then families were selected to have a day at a weekend to go through the journey mapping for the clinic. And we weren't aware of who the families were, and it was completely anonymized. And then we were fed back the results. And as a clinic director, I was obviously very anxious about those results coming in. And we had the good, the bad, and the ugly. But that really allowed us to focus in terms of how we were wanting to deliver our clinical care at the hospital. And it certainly was very much patient-focused. And so what I'd like to ask the panel is their thoughts of patient engagement in the quality improvement process.
Did you, is there anyone in particular that you wanted to direct that question to, Mark?
Anybody.
Anybody? And Ronnie, Sandy, did you hear that well enough? Okay.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that on two fronts. I am starting a project. We're actually just writing up the proposal and trying to figure out how we want to design it. It's a quality improvement project on co-production, using a tool that a patient had in our collaborative, although this is a separate project, not from the collaborative. So she wrote this tool whereby the physician and the patient in the clinic together write out on different sides of the page, basically, but at the same time, what their goals are, what their frustrations are, what they foresee the clinic visit to be, et cetera. And then they share it with each other. And she has found when they piloted it at her clinic that a lot of times those goals were totally different. And so it redirected the clinician to address, or the team, to address the patient's, what the patient wants to get out of that visit or that hospital visit or whatever. So we're trying to expand it and make it a multi-center project. So that's one thing. I think that patients absolutely have insights into how to improve the provision of care. In our own CFresh work, part of the research questions that we have generated are not just clinical, but also about health services research or about the provision of care. So, for instance, questions about, is it better to have an OBGYN round in the CF clinic? In other words, how do we get specialists in sexual reproductive health who are to be interested in CF and also to address the interaction of CF and sexual reproductive health issues in the CF clinic. So how best to change the provision of care such that those issues are addressed. And, one of the suggestions is to have an OBGYN round in that clinic. So that's just an example. So yes, I think absolutely we need patients involved in QI projects.
Ronnie?
Yeah, can I add something there? So my wife actually sits on a quality improvement committee, and so I get to hear tidbits once in a while. And here would be my encouragement to the audience who's maybe thinking about getting into quality improvement work. Don't ask patients and families what they want to improve unless you're willing to do it. And so they did a survey, and they did a survey of, again, where can we improve? Well, there was an overwhelming winner. And the consensus in the Quality Improvement Committee was, well, we can't do that. No, you have to do that. That is what the experts, that's who you serve. Those are your customers, if you will. And it's not, I can certainly share it. They said something very simple. If we reach out, we'd love to hear back within 48, 72 hours. Like, we don't want to reach out and then hear crickets for 2 weeks, right? Because you could imagine, as a parent, as a patient, like I feel like I'm struggling. Like I need some maybe direction. I need some advice. I need a script. And I reach out and I don't hear back. It's like, is there any better care than that? I mean, that's a human aspect. Like, don't leave me hanging. And so I just found it very interesting. And again, I see it in my own work, and I encourage clients, like, don't bring in a patient, don't bring in a family just to bring in a family, just to bring in a patient. We don't want to be tokens in your regimen, tokens in your program. We want to be heard, and we want to actually help impact or enact change. So if you're not willing, if you're not able, if you're not in a position to take our opinions and expertise seriously, don't bring us in the room, and continue to develop products and services that we won't use.
That's great. And tokenism has come up, and that's a great example. We have another question.
So hi, I'm Annette from Child Bright McGill University Health Center. So I just want to thank you all for sharing your very rich perspectives and how important the voice of individuals and the collective in shaping health and healthcare. So the emphasis has been on how incorporating the patients in research can really influence the people in the room, the clinicians and the researchers. Can you comment a bit about the benefits to patients in being part of being really engaged in the research, what you get out of it?
That's a great question. So what do patients who are engaged in research get out of it? I mean, it's for the common good, but as individuals, I mean, I think in the case of clinical trials, we saw that, she definitely got some benefit in some cases, and she recognizes the benefit to the community. But in the case, for example, Ronnie, where patients are engaged in research, or Sandy, beyond the payment, is there another benefit that individuals are feeling that they express in terms of their participation in the research? And I'd like to make sure that's open for in the room as well. If there are other people in the room, I know that we have some parents in the room, and we even have a patient or two in the room. If there are some comments, I'd be interested in hearing them as well.
So I would say, this is Sandy, I would say that the number one thing that patients get out of being part of a research team is having some control over and having a voice over the direction of the research, and having that research be responsive to the needs of the patients and not just the interest, the particular interest of the researcher. And then the other thing that I think patients get out of being part of research teams is the utilization of not only their experiential expertise, which is a medical sociology term, so their experiential expertise, but also their professional expertise, right? So patients aren't just patients all day. They are business people, they are policymakers, they are, professors, they are whatever, right? So we try to utilize the professional expertise of our partners as well. So we have a person who has PR expertise and has just been vital in setting up and advertising our meetings or writing memos or writing any sort of communications for our collaborative, which is not clinical research. We also are trying to do clinical research, but the setup of the collaborative is to facilitate that. But yeah, so being honored and valued also for our professional expertise.
We have, I think, a question from the online audience.
Yes. So Corinne McKay would like to know, as a person living with CF, I've noted that many of my family members are living with celiac disease or wheat flour sensitivity. Is there a connection, and is there research?
I would put that question perhaps to the room here, where we have a number of scientists and clinician researchers. I don't know if that is, if that's something that's known.
So in one of our focus groups we had on nutrition and body image, this came up a little bit, but I think the bigger issue for the women in our session was a yeast issue. So eating yeast and having yeast grow in all parts of their reproductive organ area, but also like their esophagus, and but not particularly celiac. So I'm not a GI person. But that was brought up.
Nicholas?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the benefits for patients. I think one of the key benefits that I see for myself, that I see with other patients who are involved in research, is just this breaking down of barriers and feeling less isolated. When you have a diagnostic of an illness and that you're facing this, it's a very lonesome kind of experience. And I think getting involved in something like research gives you a sense of belonging, a sense of meaning for your life. And I think that's really tangible, and I see it very much in people who get involved in research. They start making sense of what happened to them, and they acquire sort of a different kind of meaning for their life. And I think that's the major benefit, really. And just with any kind of research, just sort of gaining deeper understanding into your life, into your illness, et cetera, gives you a stronger sense of meaning, and it contributes to your well-being for sure.
Thank you.
I also think that it allows you to take control of the situation. So many patients, all the patients, they were diagnosed with CF, but this is something that happened to them rather than something that they have control over. So by being involved in the research, it feels like they're getting some control back. I also feel that with the clinical trials that we participated in them, but they were already designed. If patients were able to participate in the design of the clinical trials, I think that would also have a
I
benefit.
see Ronnie silently clapping there. I think there are probably...
Sorry,
Sandy.
can I just quickly speak to that? I think that's right. And it's the reframing of us as victims or sufferers to agents. We are agents with expertise in our disease. And we know our bodies way better than the clinicians. I know that sounds like, but it's true. We know our bodies. And I know that I've been on several research teams in the past 3 years where I have helped design, or I've designed myself, trials. Not, they're observational studies, but there was one where the researcher wanted to sort of do a blinded study where some women would be on, an IUD, and some women would be on birth control pills, and then they would switch after a year or whatever. And I was like, that is never going to happen. Women are never going to go off their birth control pills that they feel are working for them. So we have to redesign this study. Like, forget that. And it was jarring to her, but she listened, and we came up with a very different design. So I agree. From the start, patients have to be involved in formulating the research questions, and they have to be taught how to formulate a robust research question and what that means, but also then helping to be part of the conversations around the design, the implementation, and the dissemination.
Thank you. Larry.
So Larry Lyons, I'm a clinician researcher in Montreal. So just on the celiac aspect, it's something we look for. It's something that occasionally occurs, and certainly symptoms, huge overlap with GI symptoms in CF. So it's something, I don't know anyone who's actively investigating the incidence of celiac, but it's certainly recognized. Similarly, inflammatory bowel disease, there's a certain increased incidence in cystic fibrosis. So people are looking for it. I'm not sure how much per se research. As a clinician researcher, first I want to thank the panel. This has been very inspiring. As a clinician researcher, I'd also like to say that my research influences my clinical care. My clinical care influences my research. And I look forward to developing further partnerships with patients and engaging patients with it. So thank you.
And another question from the audience. Patty.
Hi, I'm Patty Tweed, and I am the provincial advocate for CF Canada in Manitoba. And I too want to thank the panelists. I am just vibrating in my chair and resonating so much with what you're saying so articulately. So thank you very much for that. And I wanted to respond to the question about how patients benefit from their participation in research. I have a son who is 35 and is keen to participate in research. We have a fabulous research project at Sick Kids called CFIT, CF Individualized Therapy, and a call went out not that long ago for people who were eligible by genetic mutation for Orkambi, but not yet on Orkambi. And my son responded to that call in like 15 minutes. He was thrilled to respond to that, only to find that it was kind of like bring your own drug with you. Yes, you can participate in the study if you have access to the drug. So my question as a parent and as an advocate is, how do we bridge the gap, the access gap, so that we can actually have the optimal participation of people who are eligible to be in studies? And I know there's a wide array of people in the room who are working together as a team on that specific question. So I just want to raise that and acknowledge that it is very real and very much something that we need to put some energy into. Thanks.
I guess that sort of speaks a little bit to what Ronnie was saying earlier as well. It depends, the people who get to participate in research, it's sometimes they're impacted by socioeconomic status, which might influence insurance coverage, different aspects of it. So it's important to keep that in mind, I guess, when we're looking to try and make sure we're getting coverage from participants from various different aspects and walks of life. Last question, Chris.
This isn't a question. This is to add to the question about what patients get out of participating. My name is Chris. I have CF. I'm 38. And part of why I participate in such things is because it's a way to make sure that bad things that happened in my experience as a patient don't happen to other kids, especially with a life experience that moved from a non-existence of adult clinics, a non-existence of a transition process to move from pediatric to adult care, and the gaps that were missed then, which in my opinion are forgivable then, but are not now. And that's why I participate in the ways that I participate.
And that wraps up our panel. I want to thank our panelists, Lena, Ronnie, and Sandy. Thank you very much for joining us today. For our online audience, we're moving into break. When we come back, there's going to be an update on the CLIMB study, which some of you are aware of. And we're going to be going also into a conversation about the infection prevention and control policy. I would love it if Ronnie and Sandy, if you were able to either stick around or come back and join us in 1 hour's time to at least to perhaps participate in that. If you're able to, it would be great. Would love to have you there. Thanks to Gilead, who are our sponsors. We will be breaking for half an hour and back here at 11:15. Thank you very much.